Welcome back to the show. Our next guest is Bruce Collins, Corporate Vice President and General Counsel at C-SPAN. Thanks for taking some time to join us here, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Good morning. You're welcome.
Good morning to you. So, first I wanted to start with cameras in Congress for C-SPAN. C-SPAN cameras in the Senate and the House. I think a lot of people don't realize that the cameras they see on C-SPAN, the actual feed, is not from a C-SPAN camera. So I wanted to ask you if you foresee C-SPAN getting their cameras in the House chamber and in the Senate anytime soon.
The answer is no. The history is that in 1979, when Brian Lamb first had the idea of covering Congress, he wanted to do it journalistically. So he went to Tip O'Neill and said, this is the plan, the cable industry is going to create a network, and we'll put cameras in the chamber. So we'll cover it from beginning to end and with no commentary. And that was the main theme. Tip O'Neill said no. So the result is all of those cameras that you see when you're watching C-SPAN in the House or the Senate, because the Senate did the same thing, they belong to the Congress. They're controlled by the Congress. So, and they have very specific rules about what they'll cover. And basically all they'll cover is who is speaking, so that you can't see reaction shots, you can't see wide shots during debate. If something's going on in the chamber that you can hear but not see, you can't see it. And it's not journalistic. And we think it's a significant limitation on the value of having transparency in the Congress.
Yeah, I remember during the CARES Act debate, there were some objections to the voice vote because not every member of Congress was present in the House to vote for that bill. It was the largest stimulus bill in history. And Congressman Massey stood up and objected and got to speak. But there were other voices you could hear of members objecting as well. But the public and journalists weren't able to see on the feed who was actually standing up in the background, in the audience, and agreeing with Massey. Do you see that as an example of the public not being able to see the full view of an important piece of legislation and the debate around a piece of legislation like that?
Well, that's the difference between journalism and government, propaganda or government television. State TV is what we have on the House and the Senate. So yes, in fact, over the years, we've noticed many times where there'll be a disturbance in the gallery, for example, and everybody will be looking up, but the state TV or the congressionally controlled cameras won't show you what's going on.
And so what do you see as the main benefit? Do you think not having C-SPAN cameras this long has actually impacted the public's perception of the legislative process and could have actually changed the public perception on certain bills or legislation if they could see the real debate unfolding and how it happened?
Well, I would like to think so, but no, because what people watch C-SPAN for is to watch the debate, and they get it. You and I are talking about isolated incidences, really, that probably wouldn't change the overall impression of what goes on the floor. But as journalists, if news happens, we want to cover it. And it happens every now and then. Not often, but every now and then.
Are you planning to make some new outreach efforts with the new Congress starting to get C-SPAN's cameras in the House and the Senate?
Well, here's a little bit of history. I told you when Brian Lamb went to Tip O'Neill said, no, we're going to control the cameras. Mm-hmm. So when the Congress changed hands from Democratic control to Republican control in 1994, we thought, well, this is a great opportunity because Republicans were into transparency and so forth after 40 years of Democratic rule. So we went to Newt Gingrich and we said, now let's put the C-SPAN cameras in. Don't worry about it. You don't have to have government employees do it. We'll do it just the way you've always suggested you want it. And guess what the answer was? No. So there's another change in control. Nancy Pelosi becomes Speaker. We say, okay, we'll go and try again with new leadership. And we asked Nancy Pelosi, this is the time for C-SPAN cameras. And the answer was no. So it happened again. There was a control change. And we've stopped asking. we're not going to keep asking again because there's too much institutional preference for a state television coverage of the legislative proceedings.
Do you think that's a good look for the United States to have what you call state-run TV in Congress?
Well, no, but the reality is that most people don't care. I don't think that if you had C-SPAN cameras in the House or the Senate, it would change people's perception that much. You might get more in cutaways, reaction shots, and that sort of thing, a greater sense of what's actually going on the floor. But that's about it. Some people wouldn't notice. Journalists, of course, would notice it.
Now, what about the Supreme Court? Has C-SPAN made any progress there on getting their cameras in the court?
Well, we started formally in 1985. We created a program series called America in the Courts. And we thought, well, the executive is on television, the legislature is on television. Let's try the Supreme Court. And we had an industry group, a bunch of news media organizations making appeals. And of course, here we are 40 years later, 35 years later, with no progress. The great change, unexpectedly, was due to COVID. The court was forced to go online to do its oral arguments so it could conduct its business. And last May, it announced that it would allow a live feed to be distributed. So we do have live audio of oral arguments, but that's as far as we've gotten.
Well, now, you've heard opponents, right? I mean, say that it would change the nature of the court if they had cameras there. You even have Justice Alito saying the cameras could prompt theatrics from attorneys and justices. Do you see it that way?
No, because we have many years of experience in state courts, including the state's highest courts. I think now all 50 of state courts have some form of camera coverage, and a lot of them have full bore coverage of appellate proceedings. Some even cover trials. Not things like child custody and divorce, things like that, but trials of public interest. And there has never been an instance where a judge has concluded that the attorneys were playing to the cameras or that anybody has determined that a judge has played to the cameras. There have been formal studies of this, of which C-SPAN and other news organizations were a part. We were very aggressive in cooperating with the federal court system under the guidance of then Chief Justice Rehnquist to conduct a study of this very thing. We even got the federal courts to do an experiment, the lower courts, of televising appeals court proceedings in a few trials. The report from the Justice Center was they determined that there was no deleterious or harmful effect on what they call the administrators of justice by virtue of the cameras. So I don't see that if the Supreme Court were to televise just its oral arguments, that it would have any great effect. And one of the one of the reasons,
Bruce,
is because
Bruce, we're actually at the commercial break coming up. But thank you so much, Bruce. We'll be back.